Welcome to the Inside Carolina podcast, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. It's Tuesday. That means it's On the Beat with Ross Martin and Greg Barnes. Make sure you rate us, review us, subscribe, do all that good stuff. It helps us out in the algorithms. Ross Martin, we're talking offline press conferences on Monday with Mac and Longo and Jay Bateman. I think we can hit on some high points. The high point offensively, I think, being the offensive line. You know, the guys get credit for skill plays, but the offensive line led the way, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a huge takeaway. I mean, obviously Michael Carter and Javonte Williams had incredible games, and they made players miss, but there were some huge holes at the line of scrimmage, and credit to the UNC offensive line. You're led by Brian Anderson and Joshua Zudu, and then the tackles. I thought Jordan Tucker had a pretty good game as well, and really getting Joshua Zudu back, I thought kept people fresh, and that's what Mac Brown and Phil Longo talked about as well. Zudu played right tackle. He played right guard a lot. I'm not sure if he played any left tackle. Do you remember, Greg? Greg's not hearing me.
I don't recall.
Yeah, actually, I think he played. Sorry, he played left tackle. He did not play right tackle. He played left guard. I got this mixed up there. But Max always said that Joshua Zudu is the best offensive lineman. So, I mean, now they kind of have that 6 to 7 rotation in, and that paid off. And they wore Virginia Tech down because in the third and fourth quarters, really when they kicked in the running, and that's when the offensive line and that endurance and having that rotation kind of paid off. So I think it was a big point by the offensive line to kind of make that statement because I thought they were kind of average the first two games, but they kept Sam pretty much upright, and the offense clicked. And I know we've probably talked about it before on the Inside Carolina podcast the last 2 days, but I mean, kudos to that group and just how good this running back group is. It was pretty impressive. So we'll see what they can do against a really athletic and a really big – my hair's just some crazy stuff today. Really big Florida State front seven. I mean, Phil Longo was going through their defensive front, and every guy on the defensive front is 290 plus. There was 6'7" defensive end. So it's going to be a test because Florida State recruits well. So I'm not as high on UNC kind of just running through the Seminoles this weekend, but it should be interesting to follow.
Greg, looking at the grades, I mean, Brian Anderson, ACC Player of the Week. Explain to me the grades, the PFF grades then that came down in your article on Monday.
Well, and I went back and looked just now as Ross was talking. Zudu played 17 snaps at left tackle and then 44 at left guard. So there was some versatility there, being able to kick out there and help Austin Richards cover that left tackle spot. I mean, I've done the ACC voting a number of times over the years, and it's just a very difficult thing. And so if you're not keyed in to exactly what takes place and you're not watching every single game, which is hard to do when you're covering a game, you look and say, okay, well, clearly the biggest storyline on the ground game this week was Michael Carter and Javonte Williams. So it makes sense that one of the offensive linemen has to be in contention, right? And from there, who knows? I mean, congratulations to Brian. How about that? I think the fact that consistently we've seen that Jordan Tucker and Marcus McKeithen this year have been the most consistently graded offensive linemen. And then Joshua Zudu, dating back to last year, has probably been the best offensive lineman in this group. But I have no issues with Brian Anderson getting credit. Everybody up front had a good game. And so share the wealth, Tommy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Anderson is a big-time leader for this team. If you've talked to this guy, I mean, he seems like he's very well-liked. He's well-spoken. I think the players really like him. I think the running backs love him. So, we don't see how that really affects the team, but, following his recruitment, it's hard not to like Anderson. You're going to have a 3-time starter, I think, at center here for UNC. So he's gotten better. He struggled last year, but, it definitely seems like he is vastly improved. You don't see those leaks in the middle like we saw in 2019. Having McKeithen next to you certainly helps. Having a Zudu next to you certainly helps. 2 big-bodied guards. And next year you're going to have a 3-time starter, Brian Anderson, at center. And that experience and savvy, knowing everything in the playbook as a center is going to be key looking ahead, and will get better with time this year.
Yeah, Tommy, Mike Ingersoll touched on this last year some. We kind of dogged Brian a little bit early, and Ingersoll was like, look, give the guy time. I mean, he's going to make mistakes, but if he hears too much of this, maybe it'll affect confidence. And I think what we've seen is that Brian has handled the adversity quite well. And he has to go back. And there's no doubt, don't get me wrong, there's no doubt that he's playing significantly better than he did last year. And that's kind of the growth that Ross is talking about. But I think it's a good problem to have when you've got multiple guys that have good games against a legitimate top 25 team like Virginia Tech.
Well, one thing you could see being there, and we were seated behind Carolina's bench where normally our tickets are on the other side, is you could see that what Ross mentioned, the leader of the group. I mean, he clearly is the leader of the offensive line, and it shows on the sidelines. It shows, pre-snap and all that. Like you said, Greg, share the wealth. The quarterback gets too much credit and too much blame. The center does too sometimes. So certainly 399 yards rushing, you get offensive player of the week. Ross, let's talk about the defense. Flip to Jay Bateman a little bit. Mac always talks about how it's good to be able to correct after a win. Well, Jay Bateman got his wish there with a big win for Carolina, but wow, defense certainly struggled, especially after the first 10 minutes of the game.
Did you watch his press conference today, Tommy?
I did.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of just taking bullets, the whole press conference, a little not defensive, but just like, I mean, there was no messing around. I mean, he kind of knows they got their butt whooped on the defensive side of the ball. Luckily, UNC won, but he wasn't making excuses. He knows they have to play better. He was down probably his most important player in Ravo Hasek, maybe the best cornerback. That's arguable with Storm Duck. Kyler Michael did play. Storm Duck was out. Storm Duck is going to be out for multiple games, it seems. And Ja'Cory Conley was also out. They didn't go with Walton Spotsville. They moved Trey Morrison down to nickel some. They were in nickel a little bit less. And then Cam Kelly and Patrice Renee got starters reps and starters minutes almost. I mean, listen to him, not making excuses. He knows they have to play better. I mean, the defensive line, I think, got exposed at certain times. You just can't – they don't have the bodies there. He was kind of – you're asking players to play more reps than they're used to. He tried to get Miles Murphy in some. Zach Gill played a little bit, but they were relying on heavy doses of Tamari Fox and Jalil Taylor. And then a lot of safeties had to come and make plays. And Cam Kelly got rocked a couple times. I thought Don Chapman looked great. I think the PFF grades show that he was one of the better players in the field. They took Chad Surratt out of the game. And I noticed that, and I think the grades noticed that as well. And Jay Bateman said they kind of schemed against Chaz Surratt and really made sure that he was not loose on plays to make tackles. Now, as a focus, you didn't really see him and see his name mentioned much. But I thought Gimmel had an okay game. But it's definitely – they need to get healthy. And Vahasek is key for this defense for him to stay healthy. And Fox to stay healthy too. I mean, he probably was very sore after that game.
Yeah, Fox came out a couple times. Tumon Fox came out. I think Asante came out nicked up a few times. But, Greg, talking about the depth there, I mean, we mentioned the offensive line, how important it was to get Azudu back. I think Vahasek plays a similar role for the defensive line, don't you think, in that when he's out, it causes everybody else to have to fill that gap, whereas when he's in there, he's going to take up two offensive linemen, let everybody else run free, including Chaz Surratt, because like you mentioned, Ross, and I thought it was a great question to Bateman, they were able to send somebody to Surratt every play and keep him out of it, whereas Vahasek might prevent that. Greg, what did you see from that defensive line specifically?
Well, I mean, this is more what I kind of expected from this UNC defense. I didn't expect them to get gashed quite like this, but more in line this week than kind of what we saw first 2 weeks. And that's a credit to Jay Bateman for getting them to play so well early. But we knew this team had significant issues up front. And Tamari Fox has been a pleasant surprise. We knew they were going to have to rely on Rava Hasek and Jalil Taylor quite a bit. And nothing has changed in that regard. I think Miles Murphy has a lot of potential. No doubt they're going to count on KBJ and Clyde Pender to provide a lot of help, and some of the new guys coming in next year. And you'll see a steady increase of the young guys getting a lot of snaps. not just this year, but in the years to come, to get this defense to where Mac wants it. But for now, you're stuck with what you got. And there's some talented guys there. Are they like Clemson level talents? No, they're not. But they can win you games. And as we saw on Saturday, if you've got an offense clicking the way the Tar Heels did, you don't have to have a great defense. You just have to be solid. And as much as we want to bang on them, the two biggest drives of the game, in my opinion, were the first two. And that you force 2 3-and-outs. All of a sudden, you're up 21-0, and you have a ton of wiggle room. You can afford to make mistakes, and they make plenty of them. But that's when you have a defense like this, where you don't have a great defensive front, you have to be able to pick your spots. You have to be able to get off the field occasionally, so it's not a true track meet where everybody's scoring 60 points. North Carolina got off the field more often than Virginia Tech did, and that's why North Carolina was able to win this game. And so I think moving forward, it's a health thing. You've got to have Ray back. And we know there's a potential that he can't play this week. He may be able to play. They're going to have to wait and see exactly when he can get back to practice and how productive he can be. But you just got to lean heavy on the guys you've got. And yes, they're going to be tired. Yes, they're going to be banged up. You just got to grind through. And that's, Tamari Fox, I think, is a good talent. Jaleel Taylor is a good player. They need more out of Zach Gill, and they need Miles Murphy to really come along. And if they can do that, you can have success. But I think the fact that North Carolina beat Virginia Tech, which is probably the best team over the next 5 weeks, that gets you into a good spot, because you don't have to have A-plus games defensively coming up as long as the offense performs. Now, you will when you get into Notre Dame and Miami. You've got to have great performances on both sides of the ball. But the offense can really carry this team the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, I think you're seeing why this is not Clemson. UNC is not Clemson. They are years away from getting to that level. You're seeing some recruiting missteps or just attrition, because once Mahasic's out, I mean, you don't have much behind him and Tamari Fox. And usually with the elite teams, they bring in maybe a 5-star redshirt sophomore who's ready to go. And that's who would have filled in for Vohasic, or a stud, maybe a junior, just hasn't played much. And he's ready. He's going to be a player as a junior and senior. And UNC does not have that. There's a huge gap from the upperclassmen to kind of these young freshmen, the true freshmen who they expect to be good, just they're not ready. And that's just not good recruiting on the defensive line. I know Tommy's boys in Johnson County all went to NC State. That run of Aleem McNeil and a couple other ones.
Savion Jackson.
Savion Jackson. Wasn't there a guy around Charlotte too who NC State got, and those guys would have been kind of
they'd be in Carolina blue without question.
yeah, we all know Tommy. And those guys would be the sophomores and juniors now, I guess. But that's what happens when you have a coaching change, and when you hire certain coaches who don't want to recruit certain positions. You bring in a transfer. And Ray Hayes is a transfer. They're lucky they have him. There's no seniors other than Zach Gill's a junior. There's no seniors or really talented juniors on defensive lineman wise. I think Vohasic is a junior, but you're seeing that gap in recruiting, and that's what elite teams do. They have players at each class who can fill in, and UNC's building that with this freshman class, the 2021 class as well. They should have that talent in 2 years. 2022 is kind of when that defensive line, I think, will start clicking.
Yeah, to Ross's point, Tommy, we're talking about a guy who is a JUCO, as Ross said, who couldn't lift upper body weights for 2 years because of injury until, I guess, last year. And he's your stud. I mean, kudos to Ray for bouncing back and battling through. That's an incredible story. But when you're having to rely on somebody in that position to be your force up front, I mean, that speaks to those recruiting issues.
I mean, oftentimes those JUCO transfers do not work out. So UNC is lucky academically and with the injuries, and that he performs and is in school. Things align for him to be there. And hopefully he's back this weekend.
Yeah, Carolina definitely needs him. And you're right. Kudos to him for putting it all together and becoming a fairly big-time player for Carolina. Greg, let me talk about defensive backfield just a little bit. Something that is concerning to me, and it's related to this discussion here and also to the linebacker discussion, is you don't want your safeties leading the team in tackles, especially against a team like Virginia Tech, and Florida State can do the same. Yeah. Dexter Reed on the wall down there. He had like 700 tackles for Carolina.
Trey Boston lead the tackles.
That's right. Yeah.
But that also speaks to not only defensive line. It starts there, but Gemmel and Surratt were relatively quiet. But I thought Morrison and, Ross is down on Cam Kelly. I thought he played well accordingly, but I thought Patrice Renee looked pretty good, especially compared to how he looked the first 2 games of the season.
Yeah, I agree. And I really think it's a situation. I mean, I don't think we give Storm Duck enough credit. He graded out as one of the top cornerbacks in the ACC last year as a true freshman. His numbers were up there again this year before getting hurt. And so that's a big loss. And Patrice Renee, I think it was interesting. There was a lot of talk before last year that, hey, maybe he can get to like an all-ACC type player. And that's still, possible, but he hadn't really played up to that juncture, at the time before the last season. And I think it kind of spiraled out of control. The hype said, oh, yeah, well, this is clearly an all-ACC guy. We haven't really seen it on the field. He's just played a lot of games. But he hadn't played in a year. And then you talk about Kyler McMichael. Yeah, very talented kid. Clemson wanted him, which says a lot. I mean, he's really playing like his 3rd game at cornerback. Cam Kelly, I mean, what did we talk about in the offseason? He played 1 game against Clemson last year and got hurt. So he's just now coming back from injury. And so a lot of these guys they're relying on in the defensive backfield are inexperienced. And so that's why you see a guy, I mean, even Don Chapman, he started the second half of the season last year, but he's still relatively young. And Trey Morrison's really your stalwart back there. That's why they lean on him the way that they do. That's why losing Miles Wolford was such a big loss, because he'd played a lot of games and he was a veteran presence back there. And that's very key to have. And so when you lose a guy like Reva Hasek up front, and that defensive front is all of a sudden not a strength anymore, and the offensive line is able to get to the second level, and then that opens up the passing game for Virginia Tech. Guys are having to defend for long periods of time back there, and it's very tough. So I think that was a game that was a great learning experience for them. I think all those guys will continue to get better as the season goes along, specifically with Kelly and Renee as they get healthier. But I thought they showed some bright spots, got a lot to work on. But it's kind of a domino effect. A lot of inexperience back there. When you add in the issues up front, it's kind of hard to cover up some of those issues.
And look, with Cam Kelly, I mean, he missed a lot of tackles. That's clear. But he was in on them, I guess, and he showed enthusiasm. He played with a lot of passion, you could tell. Kind of like the hype guy. We've seen it in former UNC DBs. But, I mean, tackling Khalil Herbert is not easy. And, I mean, if you're not a big safety, I mean, he ran right over you. You saw that a couple times. And like Greg said, yeah, I mean, Cam Kelly, you got to adjust to the speed of the game. I mean, if you haven't played in a year or so, that's going to be a huge adjustment, just not knowing the proper angles, how quick things move, how much, all the nuances to the game. That's what I think you saw out of Cam Kelly. But yeah, I did think Patrice Renee played pretty well. Kyler McMichael, I mean, I don't think I heard his name once, which usually is a good thing for a cornerback, and he occasionally comes and helps in on certain run fits and things like that as well. So that seems like a good get for UNC to secure that Clemson transfer. I mean, I don't know how good he really is, but I mean, this is his 3rd year in college, so wonder if the NFL or something like that is on his radar as well.
Yeah, and Tommy, the secondary missed 9 tackles.
Is that a lot?
That's touchdowns.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you could see it. I mean, Khalil Herbert got into that secondary. It seemed every other play.
Yep.
Yeah, they.
That's.
But I do think there was a big difference in the defensive performance in the second half. They just looked worn down.
Yeah.
And that's when Herbert really had a lot of his success.
Yeah, and Bateman said that's just an excuse, but those guys were dead tired.
Yeah, they were.
And
that's the depth, and that's.
Yeah.
That's credit to Virginia Tech for being physical and playing that big running back.
Which is why the drops that we're not going to talk about, because we've covered it, the drops and the lulls in the offense when it could have been a bigger lead in the first half made such a big difference. Allowed Virginia Tech to keep their game plan, because Carolina goes up 28 or 35-7. I'm not sure Virginia Tech can do what they did. Anyway, Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff to hear about the onside kick and all that. We won't go over it. We've been over it on these podcasts, but some interesting things come out of Virginia Tech. Going to take a break, talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnyt-shirt.com. They're our sponsors. They're your best place to get Carolina gear. Go online, shop anything you need, tailgate related, home gate related. Christmas, like Ross always talks about, Christmas is coming up. Get your orders in. Get your 10% off your order if you're a North Carolina, inside Carolina premium subscriber. And, of course, go see them when you're in town for the NC State game or beyond in Chapel Hill. Take another break. National Guys will pay some bills. We'll be right back on the Beat Podcast. I want to talk about some of these rankings. Greg Barnes, Ross Martin. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. Be back in a second. All right, we're back on the Beat Podcast. Ross Martin, Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley. Greg, I'm going to come to you on this now. It's one of those things, Buck would always reference these ESPN power rankings when he talks about his preseason predictions, and that's sort of how he made his predictions, looking at them and all. And then we see the actual polls and all this. Tell me this. A, it doesn't matter. Let's put that out of the way. It doesn't matter until the big rankings come out. But what makes the difference, and it's specifically the computer polls that we see, whether it's SP Plus or FPI?
Well, one that I've always followed is Brian Fremo's rankings. I'm trying to think exactly what those are. It's bcftoys.com, I believe. But he used to be on Football Outsiders with Bill Connolly, who does S&P. And thinking about Brian's rankings is that he wouldn't even put them up until like 6 or 7 weeks in the season. And the reason being is he's like, look, this is based on per drive data. And if you're playing one game, I mean, I could post the numbers, but it's kind of like KenPom, right? KenPom for basketball, if you look at it in December, that's not going to give you an accurate picture. You need a lot of data to support that. Now, FPI, I know a lot of people getting fired up about FPI because North Carolina, I think right now is number 26. Well, let's flesh that out. What does that mean? For one, we had a conversation last week. How good is North Carolina? Are they the fifth best team in the country? Who knows, right? I mean, sure. I mean, I don't have an issue with them being ranked number 5. I'm not in a position to say, well, clearly they're the fifth best team. But what FPI tries to do, and they're pretty open with this, it's not a ranking of 1 through 128. They're not trying to accomplish that goal. What they're trying to do is provide comparative analysis so that when you sit down and say, okay, well, Clemson and North Carolina are going to play in the ACC championship game. We think Clemson wins by this amount. So it's basically like a betting tool. It's probably the easier way to look at it as opposed to ranking. Now, why is North Carolina number 26 right now? Well, when you look at the rankings, who's number 1? So Ohio State, who has not played a game yet. And that kind of gives you a hint. What FPI does is it says, okay, in the preseason, we have to wait on what happened last year. Not only last year, we have to wait on recruiting rankings. And so what FPI does is all their preseason rankings, they say, okay, what's happened last 4 years recruiting-wise? What has happened on the football field the last 4 years? And you build all this data up to see exactly who they have coming back, how many returning starters, how many on offense, how many on defense, how many on special teams. Do they have a legitimate quarterback coming back? All this data is folded in. And so once the season kicks off, you don't automatically wipe that slate clean because the team has played one game. Each week, you remove the significance of that data as you gain more data. And so even at the end of the year, even when we're in December, there's still some of that preseason data in play. And that's how the FPI is set up. It's to say, okay, look, this season clearly matters the most, but we're also basing this off past tendencies. And so for North Carolina, you're factoring in a 7-6 year last year, right? But you're also factoring in 5 wins in 2017, 2018. And so that's going to drag North Carolina down. That's not a reflection on what they think of UNC right now in 2020. It's a reflection of how they're seeing UNC over their last, I don't know, say 40 games. And as we get further along in the season, you will see if North Carolina continues to win, they will gradually shoot up the rankings. And one way that you know that is if you look at strength of record right now, which is really a key component, they're 5th. And then when you look at, what's this number over here? Game control. in terms of how well does a team control a game that they play in? Were they in the lead the entire time? Was there any really concern that they would win? UNC sixth. Okay. That's a more accurate representation of probably where UNC is with 2020. And as the year goes along, as I said, if they continue to win, that FPI ranking will jump up quite significantly.
Wish I was as passionate about anything in life as Greg is about the FPI.
Look, Ross, something you missed. You need to go back and listen to the day after podcast and listen to Jason Staples.
Jeez, yeah.
Wide receiver talk. I know you love that stuff.
Yeah, I actually do listen to y'all's game plan. I've been listening to those on Saturday mornings, but yeah, I got to take Jason in bits and pieces. I'll tell you that.
What do you think about the rankings then, Ross?
I mean, AP number 5. That's all. That's the only thing I look at is the AP ranking. I don't think Ohio State should be ranked. I don't think any team that hasn't played a game should be ranked. That's my opinion. But I mean, is UNC at the top five team? Probably not. But they've done enough to earn that ranking. But I mean, at the end of the season, I mean, look, they're probably going to stay in the top 10 if they keep winning. So hey, we'll take it, man. It does helps our business. The freaking top 5 article did crazy traffic, so I'll take it.
And see, Tommy, that's what this comes down to. A lot of people complain about preseason rankings, and they complain about the media's preseason all-ACC teams and predicted order of finish. Well, guess what? They beg us to vote in those polls. It's not like we're saying, hey, we want to vote on this stuff. And it's because of what Ross says. It's because in the dead of July, when nobody's paying attention to anything, it gets everything revved up and it gets people talking about football. That's all the polls are for. That is it. And people are susceptible to it because they're passionate, and that's a good thing. But that is a media-driven thing. That's it. And so when it really matters is when you have the CFP poll, like Mac said. He doesn't even pay attention to the rankings until you get to that. And I don't even know when that comes out this year.
I've noticed Mac mentions the rankings a lot. More so than most coaches. Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I think it's good for recruiting, he said today.
Yep.
Happy to be there, wants to stay in the neighborhood, wants to buy a house in that neighborhood.
Right.
I mean, I think, for perception, for looks, you put out the fancy graphics. It helps everybody when UNC is in the top 5, top 10.
Yep.
But,
sure.
yeah, and then how good this team is, it doesn't really matter at this point.
Greg, looking ahead, way ahead, before, it's Tuesday, we'll talk Thursday afternoon about Florida State more in depth with our resident Florida State expert, Jason Staples. But, I mean, is Carolina in a good place going down there? I think the offense is clicking, seems to be, but the defense, is that a cause for concern, you think? Or is Virginia Tech – Virginia Tech's good, and they do what they do. So where would you rank that, talking about rankings, where's that scale of comfortableness on the defensive side of the ball for Carolina and Jay Bateman?
Well, I think the fact that Jordan Travis is kind of a guy that has looked pretty good thus far. They're kind of playing musical chairs with the quarterbacks. The offense has been a mess, and one thing that Jason will reiterate on Thursday is the fact that the offensive line's really been a crapshoot. Not just this year, but in recent years. And that's going to be a building project for Mike Norvell. And Florida State's defense is okay. So you're going on the road. I don't know how many they're going to have in attendance, but you assume it'll be a good number in Florida. So hostile environment, relatively, for 2020. And a team trying to figure things out, who, as Ross said, they have talent. That's never been the issue. It's the coaching component. And so they look pretty good against Notre Dame, and I think Notre Dame's a really good team. And so I don't think that North Carolina is going to walk in there and just blow the Seminoles out. And so, you need to see a better defensive performance. Does North Carolina have to play their A game to win Saturday? Probably not. But you can't have a defensive performance like you did Saturday and expect to win without the offensive performance that you saw on Saturday. And so it's really kind of elevating the defense so that the offense doesn't have to click on all cylinders.
Florida State's letting in 20 to 25% of potential capacity within the stadium.
Okay.
So that's a significant number of people, a big stadium. Did you hear what Dan Mullen said after the game, Florida coach, after the game on Saturday?
I did. He said he wants the full stadium because Texas A&M's was close to packed, and he was mad about it.
He said Texas A&M fans made a difference in the game. They're yelling behind their bench and everything. So he wants 90,000 in Florida Stadium this weekend, and obviously Florida State, same state, but it sounds like the Seminoles are letting in 20-25%. But
Florida
Norvell
State 90 for nothing.
Norvell says, obviously, I'd love to see as many fans as we can that are allowed in. That'd be the desire for any coach. But right now, I don't have a say in it, so I'm just going to keep coaching.
It'll be interesting. One thing, I don't know how much you guys can hear in the press box, but in Kenan Stadium, the piped-in noise, I couldn't figure out why they were playing the piped-in noise when Carolina had the ball in the stadium.
Is that a TV thing, maybe? I don't know.
Well, then I listened to it on TV, and it just sounds like a drone, a background drone. Then I thought maybe Carolina's offense wants some of that noise. It was very weird.
I was going to ask you, Tommy, like, how was it? I mean, how was the vibe in the stadium all from all angles?
I mean, it was like a spring game, to be honest. It was easy in, easy out, bell tower parking, walked in, no wait, concession stands, no wait. The only thing that was weird to me, and of course the 3,500 people is a weird number, but there were 2 seats per row, 2 occupied seats per row where we were. It looked the same across the way. There was nobody in the opposite you guys in the visitor side upper deck, and there appeared to be some in the upper deck behind us, but 2 seats per row, so it's kind of wide open. You could do whatever you wanted, and they allowed umbrellas, so the rain crowd was happy, at least early, even though it turned out to be a beautiful
You bring your son or wife or what?
I brought my oldest, yeah, and he was pumped. He was good. And one thing, and I mentioned it, we sat behind the Carolina bench. And I did want to ask y'all about this, getting back to the game. It looked like a fire drill, right much, Greg, when they were trying to get guys on and off the field. And that's why I was hoping somebody would ask Jay Bateman in the press conference on Monday is, Ross, we talked about the substitutions and all that last week, and that was a big part of the article you wrote. But, Greg, at times, they looked like nobody knew who was supposed to be out there. The 2-point conversion, which I've never seen overturned as they're about to kick the ball off on the next play. But what's going on there, Greg? I mean, yeah, that was a mess at times.
Yeah, good question. This is a matter of trying to get the right pieces in. And I think one of the challenges is when you've got really talented guys that can be versatile and play different positions, you don't have to be as precise in your packages. And so you've got guys really limited to defined roles. And so if you're going to run this particular play, you've got to have that guy on the field for that job. And we hadn't really got into it with Jay about that, but I think that's probably a lot of it is just the matter of trying to get all these pieces to fit when you don't have the ideal fit. I mean, right? I mean, if you've got a running back that can pass block, can catch out of the backfield, and can run, well, you can put him in pretty much all the time, right? But if he's not a good pass blocker and he can't catch, all he can do is run, you've got to be very selective with how you use him. And I think that's really what we've seen with some of those issues on defense.
Greg's frozen on the video.
We've gone to the Godzilla movie.
Audio is good, though. They got 2 times they had 12 men on the field, right?
Yeah, they had it. They had it one more time, and I don't think they called it, but they had it on the 2-point conversion. They had 12 on the field. And then they overturned that, and then they couldn't figure out who was going out there. It's just a mess, I guess. You got to figure out the matchups, but it looked awfully hectic, more so than I'm used to seeing. Of course, I don't sit behind the Carolina bench normally. Anyway, since Greg Barnes has dropped Ross Martin, we will finish it out. Greg went into the ether. Ross, what's on tap for your coverage this week? Like I said, I thought the substitution articles and things like that last week were fantastic. What's up this week?
Thank you. Yeah, if you didn't get a chance to read that rotation piece, I dropped it on Friday, so it might have kind of fallen in the cracks there. But I thought it was pretty good looking at how and why UNC rotates certain players in, trying to build depth and trying to get young players reps while still trying to win. So check that out. You can probably find it somewhere on the boards. And then this week, we're doing something on the offensive line, I believe. Hopefully, we talk to Joshua Zudu tomorrow, Tuesday. I'm doing the coordinator report shortly after this, get all the quotes up and some of the key parts from Jay Bateman and Phil Longo's time We have players tomorrow, see what they say. Mac Brown on Wednesday. I'll get 10 things up from Mac Brown. And, yeah, I mean, it depends on what kind of news we get. I mean, what kind of storylines you think are coming in this week? I think the offensive line is definitely a story of note. Running backs are kind of already covered.
Yeah.
And maybe some depth and how exposed the defense got is another storyline.
I think an interesting part of Longo's was him taking blame, I guess, for not having Daz involved. Because you see when Newsom's involved, it's completely different offense. I mean, Miami gets open deep because Daz is involved early. So I think that's a good line to take.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
He also mentioned trying to get Garrett Walson more involved. I mean, he has 2 catches in 3 games, and he was a big name in the preseason. I mean, they're just not looking for him. He's mostly in there as a pass blocker and run blocker, but I mean, he is a pass catching tight end. That's how he was recruited, and he hasn't really been a factor in terms of the passing game, and that would open things up too. If you have a big target across the middle and the short routes, you would get more stuff going deep as well. You would think if that becomes kind of an option.
Yeah, and I think Azudu being back and that offensive line getting some consistency can allow him to get out on routes rather than having to stay in and block. But you're right. They've got to utilize those guys underneath. And Boston College showed what a big-time tight end can do for an offense.
Well, and you're reading John's articles throughout the last couple of weeks about recruiting Bryson Nesbitt, and Max said he called him and told him about Garrett's touchdown in the first game. And, it was the first play, first touchdown, and since then, 1 catch. Yeah. So if they want to recruit big-time tight ends, they're going to have to pass to the big-time tight ends. And you saw Tim Brewster leave as well because of how Longo utilizes tight ends. So, I mean, is it part of the offense? Is it not? I mean, sometimes you got to kind of show it if you want to talk about it.
Yep, might be a chicken and egg type thing. Who knows? They'll have some opportunities. I mean, because I don't think Florida State's going to be very disciplined on defense. I think they can take advantage of some of those guys. We'll see, though. It's watching the press conferences, and I will tell our listeners and our watchers, if you're watching this on YouTube, you need to click over and watch Mac Brown and Longo and Bateman, their weekly press conferences. They didn't seem very pleased. Even Longo did not seem overly pleased about the performance. I guess – I mean, am I misreading that, Ross?
Longo you can't get much emotion out of him either way. I think he holds this offense to a pretty high standard, but I mean, Mac was very happy with Sam Howell, with 18 for 23, 80%, dishing it out, kind of like a point guard and letting the running backs run. I mean, I don't know how much better the offense could run, but definitely on defense. I mean, you saw what you saw. I mean, they ran all over UNC and kept scoring throughout the game, and UNC let them back in. So that's never a positive when you kind of have a team by the neck and then they come back. And I was pretty nervous heading into that third, fourth quarter.
Yeah, but once it got down to 5, somebody texted me and said, "We'll find out what they're made of right now." And they showed up. They stepped up. But you're right. They've got to get some turnovers.
Onside kick was not – I mean, they missed that. Mac mentioned that as well. I mean, that's a mental error, not being ready for that.
Yeah, that reminded me, I don't know if you watch pro football, but I think it was the Falcons just standing around waiting for somebody else to grab the ball. That's what that one looked like. I don't know. They got a lot to work on, but it's always good to do it when you're 3-0. So going to Florida State on Saturday night, it should be another tell. I mean, winning on the road at Florida State's a big deal, no matter how good or bad the Seminoles are. So we'll talk about it aplenty, I guess. I'm going to wrap it right now. Ross Martin, and that was Greg Barnes. If you have the mental image of Greg frozen on your screen, he'll be back with me on the Game Plan podcast late Thursday night. But Ross, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
For sure. See you, Tommy.
Yep. You've been listening to the Inside Carolina podcast sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Rate us, review us, subscribe. We'll see you next time.